any large story that interests people, can hold them attention for a considerable time, or make stories practically always, a human story is practically always about one thing, aren't they? Death. The inevitability of death.
How we choose to live, and if we should be so lucky, how we choose to die. As you just heard from Professor Tolkien, I'm inclined to agree. Almost all stories are about death. Truth, funnily enough, is often paradoxical. While stories about life simply feature the slow passage of time, concerning yourself with all manner of distractions to avoid meditating on the slow, creeping, perhaps terrifying, but inevitable end of our lives. Playing Dark Cloud again, although this isn't the video essay you are owed at the end of my playthrough, I happened upon that scene of Fudoh and Goro. For those who don't know, Fudoh was the village champion proclaimed a guardian god by the denizens of Matataki village. Fudoh chooses to leave his son behind in what would appear to be a selfish decision to go out before his body fails him in totality. This year, I lost 3 people in a single week, one of whom was my aunt dying a slow and painful death. Even my best friend in that same week lost his mother after years of a medical impasse and fighting these uphill battles. I think in the traditional sense, neither would have been called a warrior with swords and axes and what have you, but I think probably like many who've lost family to sickness or those who are suffering through impossible battles with illness right now, I'd strongly think these people are some of the mightiest warriors. I myself became quite physically capable and have been in some precarious situations of my own. You're like, yeah, how tough could they be if he's using words like precarious? Okay, listen, my career in the infantry consisted only of training. And I do contemplate the sort of dharmic, if I'm using that correctly, implications. At the time, I was extremely frustrated to do all that training, for nothing. The idea that, one day, like it or not, my end will come. I'm pretty grateful, I guess, that it didn't come back then. Uh, you know, towards the end, all my aunt wanted to do was go to sleep, for the pain to be over. And I couldn't help but think all the time, don't we have a right to choose how we meet our ends? The majority of this game, barely dips its toes into these dark undertones and the macabre, but they are all right there. As a child, this moment between Goro and his dad was completely overlooked by me. I picked up the game when my biological mother was still alive, and I saw swords and snakes and, village building, and, the game dazzled me. For most of us, thinking about death, the idea of death, it's insanely personal. We fixate on what happens after, what happens during. Too often you're forced to think of what would happen to those left behind if you're lucky enough to have people to leave behind. In this case, because of the magic of fiction, Goro is able to receive his father's spiritual voicemail and get the full truth. He hears how his father felt and his father's wishes, and uh, he's forced to reconcile with not only how his father chose to die, but how the villagers didn't even have the heart to tell him the whole story. It's hard to watch our bodies decay, especially, once everything that was easy and taken for granted suddenly becomes an immense feat, like using the bathroom on our own, something we gain control of fairly early on in our lives, for most of us. That physical autonomy being robbed from you by an enemy you can't stand and face directly seems overwhelmingly cruel. I, for one, went from being bullied, weak, nerdy with no skills to, a martial artist, a veteran. Again, nothing serious that happened, but it was physically demanding. And if you see me at a function, I'm usually, balls deep entertaining a large crowd. To know and watch myself weaken and become impotent and that I can't stand or speak properly, it's almost impossible for me to imagine because every day I've gotten up with the potential to do these things. What does it really mean to be a warrior? I suppose just picking apart the word would be, yeah, one who deals in warfare. But beyond that, you see this archetype come across many cultures. These concepts, while not always held up by the most respectable, were eventually carved out, in multiple cultures to be a class of people who were supposed to live and die by these ideals and morals. The expectations of society for these people was to deal in death, to be morally responsible, and not just physically, but mentally strong and disciplined. If you're someone who becomes as strong as Fudoh, essentially Achilles of, this little hunter village, the burden of legacy is suddenly, I'd wager a point of contention. And I'm not a father just yet, and I know this is a scene written here, to give some backstory and maybe a tear or two if you're like me and particularly cheesy. But if I was forced to, choose between slowly suffering and withering away, but the trade off is I get to see more of my son, or going out in a grandstand against a truly powerful adversary and keep my legacy, air quotes, intact, it's impossible for me to say, because that decision luckily isn't before me. To be honest, how we meet our end in the first world, at the very least, I'm grateful for every day and every small modern convenience I receive. But it's, we're probably, hopefully, and in some ways, hopefully, I'll probably be leaving this world, fat and old with with a little luck. There'll be people in my life, helping take care of me. But I do, I have my Saiyan pride, right? The thing is as a fighter, my pride, that disgusting bit of ego, which, perhaps served a purpose, in human history, and it drives me to both scorn, my own personal ending in such a way, but it also kind of makes me want to play last man standing. How long, can I stay in this world, right? And I know that for the spiritual or for the religious, you would probably, torch on a wall, little Plato, basically this is the illusion, this physical realm, right? I never met my own father. I don't even know what he looks like. I guess he went for milk. So I don't know some of the particular struggles between, a father and a son. I will say that Goro decides that he'll go and save the world, but because he wants to. Because presumably he wants to overtake Fudo's legacy and become a mighty warrior in his own right. It sucks that I don't have much fun playing him. Because in all honesty, I think his backstory is a lot more interesting than Tolan's, the main characters. Not that he's not a good boy with some, Batosai level skills. I guess, here I just couldn't help but fixate on this little bit of existentialism threaded in so quickly into a game that's, largely stock standard as far as a lot of its themes go. But the whole reason why I chose to replay this game and make it my first kind of foray, onto the webs was because I felt there were some real nuggets like this one hidden in here, and this is one of them, to all those that are fighting any battles, of any kind. I hope you get to live strong, and remember that no one should choose how you live. Yeah, in my opinion.
He actually quotes these words of Simon. There is no such thing as a natural death. Nothing that happens to man is ever natural, since his presence calls the whole world into question. All men must die, but for every man his death is an accident, and even if he knows it and consents to it, an unjustifiable violation. Well, you may agree with the words or not, but those are the keyspring of the laws of the ring. People do not fully understand the difference between an allegory and an application.